You're listening to the Military Podcast with Drea Jones, episode 36. All right, ladies, so today we're talking about how our goals can change within our career before and after baby. And to do that, I've got two of my amazing best friends, Jessica Bates and Lauren Daly, as we all three had kids within 6 months of each other and had extremely different experiences with our career after kids. So let's just start off, guys, by kind of doing a background of who we are and introduce everybody to introduce you guys to the listeners. I'll go first. I know.
Okay, go. I was like, who's going first?
Yeah. No, so you guys know me, so I'm Drea Jones here. But I really haven't done a one-on-one conversation with you all since my birth story, which was, oh my God, 30-something episodes ago. So basically, we're at 15 months now after Trip was born, and I will have to say, before Trip was born, my expectation was to do 20, right? So I loved my career, loved what I did, came in early, left late, and this is what I wanted to do. It's always what I wanted to do. And I never realized after Trip was born how much that would change, especially as a dual military family, which we all are here on the screen. But now I'm kind of like, Brad explains it as meh. She was like, you're kind of meh about your career. You want to do it, but you've got options to get out. And that's exactly why I made this podcast. That's exactly why I signed up to become a virtual assistant. Like, I just want options. I don't want to be tied down to have to work away from Trip for the next 13 years until I retire. So that's kind of a quick snapshot on me, and Jess or Lauren, whichever one of y'all want to kick it off next.
I'll go, I guess. So Drea and I were actually in the same career field. That's how we met. And I was in the same class with Lauren from school, from college. So we kind of all met at unique points in our life. I was active duty until 2018, and then I separated and went into the reserves. And now I'm doing reserve stuff. And then I also worked as a civilian for the DoD. And now I'm a reservist on active duty orders working here. So kind of had a unique flow of life and going on orders, going off of orders. Am I active duty? Am I not active duty? Am I a dependent kind of status? I've kind of done it all now, which has been very interesting and unique. My daughter, I guess, was the first one out of our friend group here. She's 21 and a half months now, full of personality and really learning her voice and finding her stances on things. So that's been very interesting. But I'm kind of like Drea in the sense that I'm kind of meh as well. I'm not really, I wanted to stay in 20, like when I was at school, I wanted to stay in for the full 20, retire, like love my career. But then I obviously chose to get out of active duty for a reason. And I don't regret that at all, but I'm also ready to be completely done now and not even be reserves, and just kind of figure out what's next and be a mom and be a spouse and still support the military, maybe do civilian jobs, but I'm kind of in that same place. I just not really sure what I want to do quite yet. So, but I don't think 20 is it anymore.
And then we have Lauren. So that was Jess. I don't think you said your name.
Oh, I'm Jess.
All right. Well, I'm Lauren Daly. I had my son 17 and a half months now, and then we are also expecting a little girl in early March. So I will say I came out of school, out of college, like gung-ho to about the 20 years. That is still my goal today. I've been lucky that for the majority of the first part of my son's life, I've been able to be home. I just recently had to leave him for the first time for 5 weeks for new training for flying. And it was hard being away from him, but at the same time, like I felt like I could do it. Like it was just a new place for me, like a new place for my husband to be the one who was left home with the kid. And then for me to be the one that was gone, and kind of like trying to parent or help from a distance. But so yeah, 20 is still my plan. I will say, after number 2 shows up, you just never know how life changes. But I've been lucky. I've been flying as a pilot my whole career, and if I can stay that way, and the Air Force still kind of gives me what I want and what's best for our family, I figure we might as well continue this journey. My husband is actually the one who may get out. But even then, like if it's kind of one of those things, if it still works out and we get joint spouse, which is, we've been apart at the beginning of our marriage, and we did that for almost 4 years where we weren't stationed at the same base. Now we'll never do that again. Then we're gonna have to find something else to do. But yeah, that's plan A, is still serve the 20, at least for me, and then for my husband, we'll see what happens. So yeah.
So let's start this. I'm going to ask some questions that our listeners had on this topic, and what they struggle with. And I think we'll just kind of hit all of us, or, however we want to go for the flow. But Lauren, I kind of want to start with you for this first question they had. It was, what did you think about life after having a kid? Just because, since you still want to do 20, was there any shift in your priorities, your mindset, after having your first?
Yeah, I will say, like, I looked at that question that you sent us yesterday, and I was like, I guess I was kind of naive, or maybe ignorant, and didn't really think about, hey, what is this gonna look like after the kid comes? Like how I've seen women, there aren't very many who you see, like, who are in the military and have kids and keep going. And most of the time, like, women get out because it's just so hard. And I just thought that I knew I was going to be busy. I knew I wasn't going to get to go out for a dinner and with friends or stay out late anymore. But I didn't realize until I was in the situation, like, how much time a kid really is, and how you have to be willing to kind of let go of work a little bit. Like, before, I was, I'm type A go-getter, like, try to do everything, be involved as much as I can at work. And I definitely had to take a step back after having a kid, and it just kind of ebbs and flows. Like, there's times where, work has to be the focus, and I've, luckily got my husband to help, or, it's the other way around. Like, if my husband's on a trip or deployed or something, like, my focus is my kid. And I've been lucky so far to have leadership that supports me with that. But yeah, I guess I didn't realize, like, I don't know, just how different it would be, because I don't think I really thought about it. I was like, oh, I'm having a kid. Like, it's just gonna be dropping him off at daycare every day, and I'll see him at the end of the day. But it was really more than that. I mean, they get sick, you have to feed them. Like, I nursed for a year. It was a lot of work. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, and you and your husband deployed during those first, like, early months. So that, I can't even imagine, not having someone to pass them off to at the end of the day when you come home. Like, here, Brad, take them. It's your child.
It was a big challenge at first, but I mean, as you guys know, like, us moms, we just figure it out, like, and just keep going.
I think I was like Lauren. I think that I spent a lot of time thinking about pregnancy, and it took us about 5 years to even get pregnant. So I focused a lot on the pregnancy part, and not so much on what comes after when there's actually a baby there. I decided to separate well before, and I had already put in paperwork and had my separation approved before I even found out I was pregnant. So then when I did find out I was pregnant, about 2 months before I fully separated, I thought, oh, this is great. I'll just be like a stay-at-home mom and everything. And then I realized just how hard that really was. And trying to feel like, oh, it's going to be all natural. Everything's supposed to be easy. Like, when you just get that mom instinct, you'll know exactly what to do. And it really didn't feel like that at all for me. I felt like my husband, Michael, he figured it out really easily, and he seemed to like take to being a dad really easily, and I struggled a lot. And I remember crying a lot initially because I was just so overwhelmed with everything. Like, oh, I'm a failure. I should have been thinking about what happens day one after baby versus being pregnant. So I didn't think it was going to be as different as obviously having a kid has been, but it's been a learning experience for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in between you guys. So I remember, and Jess and I were just talking about this, that I wanted to do this podcast to make sure I remember the times, what goes on. And I am already, after a year, forgetting kind of what was happening in that beginning stage. So Lauren, you're fun. You're doing it again. So you can remind us all. But I remember being like, my parents were both in the military. If they can do it, I can do it. There's going to be no change. And I never grew up around kids. So I had no idea what to expect. So I think I was kind of so busy at work, I didn't even think about the after effect. In my mind, I was like, oh, I'll figure that out during maternity leave. And then realized real quick, just like Lauren, there was no time. I don't even remember those first 3 months. Like, I think I was just sleep deprived, definitely for the first couple of weeks. And then after that, just figuring it out, especially with the new pace, not being at work, not being social, just living and breathing by a child that never slept because mine was not a sleeper. So it was so different. I think that's when my first aha moment came, was when I had to go back to work that first week. And all I wanted to do for the first time ever was not be at work. That's kind of where it hit me. So how did you guys feel when you got off maternity leave?
I chose to go back. I know both of you are still active duty at the time. I wasn't. I applied to be in the civilian position in the office that I had left, and I instantly regretted it. For the first few months, I just felt like, why did I give up staying at home with my kid to come back to this? I didn't have to do this. Why did I do this? So honestly, I had a lot of regret going back immediately. And I think it was hard for me to finally find that love of, like, the reason I went back was because I love that job. But I felt guilty, I guess. And so initially I was very regretful, but when we finally found our groove of how things worked together and how our family could handle like daycare and pumping and things like that, then I finally was a little happier about being back in the job that I loved doing. So, and I felt like I was actually doing something for my daughter, showing her that like I could still be my own person and a mom at the same time. Not that she could tell that, she was like 6 months old, but I was showing her like you can still do the things you love and still be a good mom. So a lot of regret initially.
Yeah, I'll say I was ready to go back to work. Like 3 months was the perfect amount of time for me. I realized during maternity leave, while that was a chance for me to bond with my son and recover from having a child, I kind of like had a loss of identity almost after becoming a mom. Like, you see people, like I'm a flyer, right? So you see people in the squadron still going on these great trips and getting to fly around the world. And I missed that. I missed being involved. And I mean, when I went back to work, it was hard. Don't get me wrong. Like, I cried the first week dropping my son off at the daycare on base, like every day. And he didn't sleep there. Like, it was a very stressful situation. And then figuring out the pumping, like, just finding a room to do that in, and what time, and in between meetings, like it was a lot of work. And luckily I had other women in my building who had gone through this recently, so I could go to them and just kind of like vent, like, hey, how do I do this, how did you do this? And so I was lucky that I had those women kind of available to me to just get advice on how to do everything. And but after a while, you kind of just get into your groove. Like, it becomes the new normal. and you find your routine. And I mean, I enjoyed being back at work. It was very overwhelming because I don't think people realize this. And I'm very careful now with women who come back from having a baby. Like, people are like, oh, when are you going to fly again? When are you going to get current? You know, here's your new job that you're starting. And here's like the job training we need to give you. And it was very overwhelming just those first few days because everybody expects you to do everything. And you're just like, I am just lucky that I showed up with the right uniform on today and that I wasn't late to work. So I felt very overwhelmed, but once I kind of like calmed down, took a breath and just took things, you know, one thing at a time, and found out like my groove, it got easier. But it wasn't like, I missed my son during the day, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I did enjoy being back at work. So.
How long did it take you to find a routine?
I'd say almost a month, maybe a little less than that. And then that routine kind of got screwed up again because my husband deployed when my son was 5 months old, and left for 6 months. So, and once again, I kind of had to find a new routine on just how to do things as a single parent. And that took about 2 weeks, I would say, just because by then you know everything, but now you're trying to figure out like, okay, well, he would normally get bottles ready in the morning while I was getting him dressed. And now you got to do it all. So like, how much time do you need? But, yeah, I'd say a minimum of 2 weeks, maybe a little longer, just depending on the situation. That's how long it took me.
That is impressive. I'm still trying to find a routine. I'm not lying. Like, it is hard.
You find a routine and then it changes, whether it be like something external, like your husband deploying or your husband going TDY. Like my husband was TDY for 4 days this week and I had to find a new routine just for the week. Or they hit a new milestone, or they're going through a sleep regression, or now they don't want to eat or drink whatever you were giving them, and you're constantly finding a new groove. So I think learning to just kind of go with it instead of fight it. Like I feel like I tried to fight it a long time initially, which is why it took me, I would say, probably like 2 to 3 months to really find like a comfortable routine for me personally. But once I learned to actually just kind of go with, oh, we'll find our routine as we're doing it, it felt a lot better.
Yeah, so I guess I thought work wasn't going to change. The only thing that I knew was going to change, and when I had my meeting with my commander that first day I was back, was, you know, unfortunately, Brad didn't help that much, not by choice, just because his hours at work. He was not on a normal shift like I was. So I knew coming in that I was going to have to work 7:30 to 4:30 in order to be picking up Trip on time, because we didn't choose to go to the daycare on the installation. But that was it. Other than that, I thought nothing would change, not realizing that I was going to be not there mentally. So I think I struggled with, just like Lauren said, the identity factor on, I've always pictured myself as a professional, as a go-getter, as someone that can do anything, that'll never say no, because I love a challenge. And all of a sudden, everything I wanted to do, I didn't have time for. I was overwhelmed at work and I kept saying the yeses and I didn't have time for it. So kind of my expectation, and then what happened was my performance dropped, and it was definitely noticeable because I wasn't ready and I didn't know what to expect. So I think that's something that we may all kind of struggle with, and that I really want people to learn from this podcast, is that you have to go into, before you have the kid, realize things are going to change. You have to, otherwise you're not setting yourself up for success. Because once that kid comes, like we've all kind of alluded to, is the time is no longer yours. And I was, I waited till I was a little older because I was still in the selfish phase. And I think I still was until Trip actually came into the world. And I was like, holy shit, look at this little baby. I have to feed him. Like, they are not independent. And that's where my naivety came from, was just not being prepared. I read all the books, kind of knew what to expect, but none of that really prepares you for what's going to happen. And every kid is different, and you cannot compare yourself to anyone that you even know or have talked to. It's gonna be different. Yeah, so I just felt not prepared, and even to this day, over a year later, every month I'm learning something different about myself, and how my priorities keep changing the more Trip develops and the more I see the demand on each career field. It depends on what your goals are. My goal was 20. Now it's more of positional, like, hey, I would like to do this, until kind of like Lauren said, Brad and I were apart for 6 years, and I'm not willing to do that again. So I think that's my line in the sand, to separate. But that's taken time and acceptance. So I can say it out loud. Brad and I have been discussing these things, but actually being able to put words into action are going to be tough. I don't know if I'll actually ever separate. I don't know, but it's always there in my mind. And then the questions start on, I didn't have postpartum depression personally, but there was definitely times where I thought I wasn't good enough, that I was, not a great mom, comparing them to everyone that I was looking at. It looked so natural, and mine was not. Sitting in a chair, crying with Trip, feeding him before going off to work, not wanting to leave him, sleeping in a little bit and being late to work because I just didn't want to leave him. Luckily I had the ability to do so, but it definitely didn't look great in my career or at the workplace. But I think the mental state that I was in, it wasn't bad, but I definitely wasn't as sound as I normally was on the decisions I was making.
I agree. I feel like that's a big thing that people don't really talk about, is the mental piece, like the fourth trimester, how you're going to feel, all the emotions. I mean, not only did your body go through something, amazing, but also pretty traumatic, to bring a human into the world. Your body goes through a lot, which causes your emotions and your psychological well-being to kind of be like thrown for a loop, one that you've probably never experienced before. And so I don't think I really thought about that enough, and how I'd never cried so much. It was so strange to be sitting. We were in the hospital for about 5 days after I gave birth. And I just remember sitting on my bed crying, and my nurse sitting on the bed with me while my husband and my baby are sleeping. And she was just trying to like help me through that emotion that I hadn't really thought, oh my gosh, I'm just gonna feel things so intensely all the time. Because I felt the same way, where there were days where I slept in because I didn't want to take my kid into daycare that day and deal with that like emotional, here's my child, please take care of her while I go to a job that is beyond stressful and nothing like it was, even though I had been doing the same job I did before I had a kid. I think that's something that we don't talk about a lot. And I guess the moment when you do talk about it, it actually helps a lot when you can talk to your friends or your peers or your coworkers that are maybe going through the same thing. That helped me. That was the only way I was able to be like, okay, you're not crazy. You're not an insane person. You're just a mom trying to figure out how to be a mom at the same time.
So I kind of want to switch into now jumping out of maternity leave into the workplace, because Lauren, I want to ask you a few questions. I know Jake didn't take to a bottle well, right? Did he take to a bottle well or no? Because I know he didn't sleep well, but I thought you had a few struggles that I can only imagine led to stressful environment.
Yeah, so it took us a while to find the right bottle, but he did take one. I will say the first few days of daycare, it took him a while, I think, just because new people, new environment, to like take the bottle from them. And I was lucky that, he was on the daycare on base, so I could go during lunch to feed him. So I did that the first couple months coming back to work, just as a way to see him like in the middle of the day. And then also like if he wasn't taking a bottle from them, he was still getting food. But it took him about almost a week to kind of get into a routine with taking bottles with them. But yeah, he did not sleep. That it was a, room full of 8 screaming babies up to a year old, and their cribs are in the same room, and some babies can sleep in that environment, but mine could not. So he would sleep maybe 20 minutes a day, which for a little one is just disastrous. So evenings were very stressful because he was just so tired. But so yeah, that was hard. I had a little bit of mom guilt because I would drop him off, and especially when my husband was gone, I was like so thankful for these women, because I'm like, oh, just I have somebody to hand this baby off to, like, and get a break. Even though I'm going to work, it's like it's a break from my son for a little bit. But at the same time, I felt awful because I was like, I know you're not going to sleep, and it's going to be a hard day for you, and then even harder for both of us at the end of the day.
So now, when you were away for so long, because you said you did that for a month of going to daycare, right? Throughout the day?
Yeah, about 2 months, I think. Unless I had to fly, I would try to go over there during lunch and feed him.
So did anyone ever address you at the workplace? So I know quite a few listeners have reached out and said, when I take, go pumping, or I'm just gone for kids appointments, it's that perception that I'm not there and I'm getting special treatment. And did you run into any of that?
Nobody ever said anything to me personally. I think it was one of those things that I just, would say I've got to go. And I, mainly worked with men. And I think just, the word pumping just made them uncomfortable, honestly, unless they had a wife who also worked and, also fed her baby and did the same thing. And those men were actually very understanding. They just, they just felt it was awkward. But I was lucky that I didn't have any issues with that. I mean, I had to pump in the plane a lot too when I was flying, and I would just like go sit in the back, and, I'd be like, have like a cover up over me, but, they just dealt with it. It was one of those things where one of the women who, she separated, but she was in my squadron, and she told me, she's like, I told myself that I would never like feel bad or sorry for, needing to leave the meeting early to pump or something like that. And I kind of, while I felt guilty, I tried to have that same mentality, because I mean, as you guys know, when you're nursing, like if you go too long without like, relieving that pressure in there, like you can really, that's a health issue. And that's kind of one thing that I had to explain to 1 or 2 people was, like if I wait past a certain time, like I'm going to have clogs, and it's, could potentially become mastitis, and kind of explaining it to them in that context. They understood a little bit more, a little bit, not completely, but yeah, it was just one of those things. I think I took, a page from this other woman's book and was like, I'm not going to be sorry about it. People go and take smoke breaks all the time, and nobody bats an eye. So I kind of was like, this is my quote unquote smoke break. But yeah, and I'm still getting my work done. And when it starts to affect my work, then we can talk. So,
Jess, do you have any barriers? Because you're a civilian, so I mean, you have a little bit more strict rules than active duty or even reserves do.
I guess sort of. I felt like I had to almost track my time more, because we're not 24/7 as a DoD civilian, right? And so I did feel guilty all the time pumping, especially early on. Our command was going through some pretty major issues at the time, and so I really didn't feel like I could leave to pump. And like Lauren was saying, like it was uncomfortable, it hurt, and I genuinely think that the way I approached pumping when I first went back to work, where like I felt guilty for doing it, and I genuinely didn't feel like I had the time to do it. I think that's the reason that I had to stop, that like my supply dried up and wasn't enough. I did not have good experiences with pumping at work. I had people nonstop complain about having a pumping room in the first place. It had a code on the door, and everybody and their mother had the code to the door. And I got, even with a sign on the door saying like, I'm in here pumping and everything like that. I mean, I literally use the word pumping because like Lauren was saying, that kind of usually grosses people out for some reason. So I knew that that should try to help, but I got walked in on 3 different times by people just walking in while I'm sitting there with like my stuff out trying to pump for my kid, you know, until I got the code changed on my door. And then I heard complaints about, oh my gosh, I can't believe you got the code changed to the door. And they were always trying to take over the space I had for contractors. So I did not have a good experience with that. And it was really frustrating because I was in a building with, other than my office and my team, majority of the people in our building were men and older men, and they just were not very supportive of me pumping. Things did change a little bit later. I mean, I was done with my pumping journey at that point, but the first time they actually took it seriously was when somebody on the leadership support team got pregnant, and then she started planning, oh, they decided to actually dedicate a room. And I was like, that would have been nice to have had any support, because that was the most stressful thing for me was pumping. Honestly, I hated it, and I never felt so much stressed out. Like, and that's when I felt the most lonely, actually, because I wouldn't take my lunch break. I would pump during my lunch break, and I would, you know, pump a couple times during the day. And then I was so efficient working because I didn't want anybody thinking, oh, she's just taking all these breaks, right? So unfortunately, I didn't have someone like Lauren did, where they were like, just don't apologize for it. You know, people take smoke breaks. People, I mean, heck, people don't even focus on work and they're off, you know, just talking to other people in the building. But I really didn't. I was just like focused on my work, so that way it would never be a question of like I wasn't performing like I should be performing. So I really had a hard time going back to work with that part, and it made me stop doing it a lot sooner than I had initially wanted to.
So you said they changed. Go ahead, Lauren.
I was just gonna say, I think sometimes too, like we're our own worst critic. Like, I mean, and obviously I wasn't in your position, but I mean, unless somebody directly came up and told me, you know, your pumping is affecting your working, I think that we put a lot of that, I don't know, pressure and just those thoughts in our own head. Because like you said, there are people out there who just, they chat all day at work, and you know, they go take their smoke breaks, you know, for 15 minutes every hour. Like, and I mean, just like you, like, you know, I didn't get to go out to lunch for hour, sometimes 2 hours with the guys, like during the lunch push every day, because I had to go pump and just sit in that room by myself for, you know, 20, 30 minutes and then go back to work, you know, to try to make up for the time that I would pump later that afternoon or something. But I think sometimes like we put that pressure more on ourselves when it may not even be there. And one thing too is like, I mean, I can be a pushy person, but I was lucky that the pumping room in my building was already set up. It was kind of a closet nobody cared about, but I also, I didn't want like women who came after me to not, you know, have what I did. Like I walked into the bathroom one day and there's a young enlisted member pumping. Like she had just got back from maternity leave, and I was like, oh my gosh, like we have a mother's room, like let me show you where it is. And I immediately went to her supervisor and, you know, told them like, we have this set up for people in the building. Like next staff meeting, I just stood up and I was like, hey guys, like if you have anybody coming back from maternity leave, we do, and they're breastfeeding, like we do have a room. And it got highlighted, and like the deputy group commander ended up being his project that maybe the room we have right now isn't even good enough. So I felt like it was almost like my duty to make sure that, you know, like keep my pumping schedule or try to make it known, just because, I mean, I was a captain. Like I had a little bit more weight than this like young enlisted member who just got back. And I mean, she probably just would have kept pumping in the bathroom like for however long she was going to pump if I wouldn't have just randomly walked into her that day.
Yeah.
I pumped in my car for the first 3 days when I went back to work, because until someone was like, hey, do you know that the girl who was here before, she kind of set up this room, like she would pump in here. And I said, no, I had no idea. And I didn't, honestly, at the time, I didn't know what my rights were because I wasn't active duty anymore. So I wasn't sure if I had the same rights as everybody else. You do, by the way. So knowing your rights is a big thing. But yeah, I literally took the guidance from, DOD and slapped it on the door after people started complaining. So I started being more on my room and just my space. And it was an interesting one.
Oh, that's good.
So
And
I'm
yeah,
glad you're doing that.
Yeah, for anyone listening, for each branch, all the rights that you do have is on the Military Working Mom website under resources. So grab those. They have changed over the past few months for each branch. So make sure you know what you deserve, and it's not something special. You're not getting special treatment. If it is in a regulation or an instruction, it's obviously there for you to use. It's not something that you're getting special treatment for. So I was luckily I had a female boss. I came into my new job pregnant, so they automatically, when I got my tour, they're like, hey, here's the mother's room. And I, at the time I was like, okay, great, whatever. I didn't realize that I was going to need it quite often because I overproduced. And when you overproduce, you end up pumping a lot more than normal. So I think the reg was, every 3 to 4 hours, and I was doing it every 2. And when I mean overproducing, like I would get 8 ounces every 2 hours. It was crazy. And I was in my office space. My office space was in a place where I couldn't take my work, my computer. You couldn't have any signals, any devices. So in order for me, like we were talking about that mental state, it's all about everything's almost, unless someone directly tells you or you get feedback that it's interrupting your workplace, it's mostly you. So for me, at that time, I was still like, hey, I can do everything. I can't sit in a room for 10 to 20 minutes just by myself thinking of my own thoughts. So I would try to bring in work as much as I could. I'd print off PowerPoints. I would print off, checklists, something that I could read or do or something to be proactive. So I felt like I wasn't wasting time. I think I'm still nursing. So probably about month 6, I gave up on that and I just started taking books in there to get my professional development time. So that's an idea as well, because I couldn't read when I went home, and I hadn't discovered audiobooks at the time. So I just read, and that was kind of my peace and quiet, my smoke break, quote unquote. But that was something else that I wasn't prepared for with my priorities and my expectations going back into the workplace. I didn't read up on what breastfeeding really entailed. I just kind of had that nonchalant attitude as, I had heard some mothers can't breastfeed after having a baby and some could. So I was like, whatever happens, happens. And I never looked into it after that. So figuring that out and realizing how often I'd have to pump, and working directly for leadership at that time, the perception was I was never in the workplace because I was in an office that was highly visible. So I would make an announcement to everybody like, hey, I'm going to my room. And I'd like take all these papers with me. So like the perception is that I'm still working. And did I have to do that? Absolutely not. I think it just kind of made me my sound of mind. So I think one thing that I've heard from both you guys and something I've learned was that it has to come from the supervisor. You have to have it. It would make life so much easier for all the moms coming in, to help them feel like they belong in the workplace, maybe to help them even feel like they want to stay in, like their service is okay with their new life, is if they have that open conversation of, hey, if you need to pump, it is okay to leave. It is okay, to do XYZ. We support you because we realize this is only a couple months, a year, 2 years, really max of your life. And you've got so many more years left in the service. I don't understand why a small snippet of time should mean so much. when you're doing this for potentially a future recruit. I remember someone we had talked to on the podcast said that before. They're like, I don't understand why women used to get kicked out, or why, we still have a lot of barriers to overcome when we are literally growing future recruits for the military. So I thought that was really cool.
I think the supervisor piece is really important because a lot of my thoughts were internal, but my immediate supervisor for the first couple of months was that way, in the sense that she was telling me, you're just not doing any work, and making me feel bad for going to pump. And so it was really stressful. And that's where, even after she wasn't my supervisor anymore, I still had those thoughts like, oh, you're missing work, because she was specifically telling me that, even though my work performance was at the same level, if not better, than it had been before I left. So that was just personally, but if I had had a more supportive leadership, I definitely think it would have helped me feel more confident about my journey than it did, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we hit all these questions that the girls had. So before we wrap up, for all of us, was there any, besides the pumping, besides, the comments from some of us, was there any other barriers that you had to overcome coming back into the workplace that, you think we can bring out and have the expectation set, so we have a plan going into it for future moms?
I think the fact that we tend to put the onus on the new mom that's already like struggling, maybe not, to educate their leadership on what the rules are versus the leadership being educated. I don't think a young enlisted member or a young lieutenant or a young officer should have to educate their senior leader on what the rules are. So I think we need to be better as the military of educating and actually making our leaders knowledgeable of the rules and how to genuinely support people. Because we can't just say, oh yeah, I support you, but then it comes across negative to their people. So I don't think the onus should be on them. I think that's something like as a military as a whole, we need to really work on. And I know there's women working on that in the military to try to make that education piece a little bit better for people. Because I just don't feel like people were educated that I worked with at all. And I felt like I had to constantly educate them, and I didn't feel like I should have to do that all the time. Like every day, anytime I went to go pump, I was a new person I had to educate about pumping.
Yeah, I wish there was a central place for pregnancy, all the regulations and policies, because I know that, the longer I've done this, I've learned the Army commanders actually have to, they're supposed to sit down with someone that comes off maternity leave or someone that's pregnant right away and give them their rights and how it's going to affect the mission, what they expect of them, which I thought was really unique and awesome. Like they actually have timelines where people have to report to their supervisor once they find out they're pregnant so they can get this information, which not all branches do. I wish there was just like a central place, and hopefully the military mom's starting to become that for some people, but I mean an official place where it's always up to date.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great idea. And I mean, I almost, even like me, who I felt knew a lot just because I had, another woman to go to in my squadron, because she had just gone through this a year before, and I had a female commander as well. And she had 2 kids and flew, and so they were able to give me that advice. But I don't know where I would have been knowing like what the rights are, or for how often I can pump, or even just like you don't have to deploy or go TDY for a year after birth in the Air Force, things like that, unless it would have been just word of mouth, or a Facebook page forum where they're actively talking about it. So I do think that's one thing is as a woman who is going to become a mom in the military, like you really need to sit down and find out what your rights are, because your supervisors most likely aren't going to have any idea. I mean, my commander, when I came back, tried to like send me out on like a mini deployment. And if somebody who was a friend in the, you know, who was the group exec in the room just happened to speak up and be like, she just got back from maternity leave, you know, I don't think she's, you know, even qualified to go right now. And like, if you wouldn't have said anything, they were like putting my name at the top of the list and without even like talking to me about it. So, I mean, even the basic ones where you think most people know now that we have that year, they don't. So I would say research those rights that you have. And if you don't know where to find them, like find somebody who does, and then just educate your supervisors. And that's going to take a lot of courage, especially to just depending on that relationship and the personalities between you and your supervisor and how well you get along. But you have to be willing to stand up for yourself and for other women that are going to come behind you, because if we don't do it, like, I mean, like Drea said, you would think we'd be past all this stuff by now with how long women have been serving in the military, but we're not. We've still got a long ways to go, and we're getting there, but it's still slow.
Yeah, I think the only other barriers, as you know, y'all were talking, I was thinking, was something really recent. So, you know, everyone here knows I'm headed out to overseas, and I like exit briefs. So me and one of my coworkers had an exit brief, and he was like, you know, I've noticed that you seem to favor women more, which shocked me. So before having kids, I was one that was like, oh, you know what? Women always complain. We think we need more stuff. Like I was that person. And then becoming a mom, it just, all those barriers that we are still overcoming really hit home because I was finally experiencing them. So when he said that, I was like, oh crap, that's something that you may need to be careful of. Is, you know, and he, just in the position that I was at, I was helping women with their leave issues coming back from maternity leave. And he didn't really see that, or he just wasn't educated on why. So I kind of had to talk them through that all the policies are changing and I want to make sure they know. But perception's reality sometimes, and how you are graded, and how you are, you know, stratted, all that good stuff. So just, I would say communication is key. It's something I learned really quick, was that you have to communicate your intentions coming back to work, both in the workplace and for your family, with your, you know, communicate with your spouse. It sounds like you guys had a pretty good 50-50 split, if not maybe 70-30 split. Brad kind of kept carrying on, and we had to have that. I think I broke down at one point and yelled at him and said I was doing everything. Even if I wasn't, it felt like I was. So, and then on the flip side, whoever your supervisor is, having them understand the whys on what you're doing, and that it's just a small period of time, like we mentioned, but that communication piece, you have to explain what you're going through. So like I said, I've had a really rough year. I've had group commander and down tell me they've seen my performance go down. And that's because they thought I had everything under control. They didn't realize that how much internal stress I was having with balancing trip, balancing Brad's deployment, balancing a concurrent PCS, selling a home, having family come visit constantly. I wasn't open about that. So finally I had to be, and then they understood, and they were able to make corrections in some processes to alleviate some of the work they were putting on me. Because obviously, you know, when they know who you are from before mom, they still may think you can still do all that work, and you may. I could not. I could not balance everything. So I would definitely say express yourself in a professional way before it comes out like I did when I was in tears in front of my bosses. So that was definitely an embarrassing moment, but it made a point. But yeah, it's been a life-changing before baby, after baby, and I did not realize that was going to happen. And it can put a lot of stress on you. So I hope for everyone listening out here, kind of take something from each of our stories, and hopefully you start realizing that it may change and what you think it may look like after the fact, and just be prepared for anything. So ladies, do you have anything else to tack on here for our listeners as we start wrapping up?
I just say, I finally understood, by the way, like that, like, I don't know, you guys probably heard that adage, like we expect women to work like they don't have children and then raise children like they don't work. And that was something I didn't really understand before. But then once I was a mom, I realized exactly what that meant. And yeah, you kind of have to have those honest and open conversations with the people around you and find the people that are going to support you, because it isn't easy, and your performance may struggle, and maybe you can still perform at the same level. But it's a catch-22. You kind of have to find a way to be patient and find that balance with yourself, and be kind to yourself, because it's hard to be a mom and to be in the military and to work and things like that. So just finding that balance and knowing that it's not always going to be a 50-50 balance. It's going to be, some days it'll be 80-20, some days it's going to be 30-70, you know. You just have to be okay with that and know that you're still a good mom because you're still there. So
Yeah, and I would say too, just like give yourself some grace. There are going to be days when you are late to work. You know, days when you forget something, or you put your name tag on the wrong side of your uniform. Never, everything is not going to be perfect. It wasn't before you had a baby, and now you've got a kid who is your world, and things are going to get forgotten, or they're going to slip through the cracks. So just be willing to like give yourself some grace and forgive yourself, and be like, well, next time I'll get it right. But that, and then also just be willing to ask for help. I think that's one of the hardest things we have to do as women. We think we can handle it all on our own. But sometimes just asking for help, whether it's to watch the kid for a couple of hours or something at work, because you can't do it all. It's hard to do. It's hard to admit that you need it, but it's not a sign of weakness. If anything, I'd say it's a sign of strength to know that, hey, I can't juggle everything right now, and I need some help.
Well, I want you guys back on here again because we don't talk enough anymore. We're in all different parts of the nation. So thank you, Jess and Lauren, so much for being on. I hope everyone learned something from each of us, and that one of us resonated with someone on here to help with that retention. We are needed in the military, but you know what? Whatever your life goals and whatever your work goals are, they may change, and you just need to be okay with that and know that your family needs to come first, because that is what's going to be here in the long run. No matter if you stay in 5 years, 2 years, or 30 years, at some point in the day, the military won't be there anymore. All these episode notes can be found at themilitaryworkingmom.com/episode 36.